Hey everyone, I'm Tobi and welcome back to my channel where I talk about bookish related things. And in today's video, I'll be doing a wrap up of all the books that I read in April, May and June. And this time I'm actually going to work my way backwards and start with the last book I read in June and work back to the first book I read in March. I definitely have to say that my first quarter of the year, so Jan, Feb, March, was definitely stronger. I had a couple of new all-time favourites or a few 5 stars. This second quarter, I think there was 1 5-star, a couple of 4.5s, but a lot of them were more that 3.5 realm, so just that bit above average. Good, nothing mind-blowing. But before I digress, let me just get into the video and let you know my thoughts on the books I read. So the last book that I did read in June was a strong one, and that was Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Machado. And this book has cemented Carmen Machado as one of my fave authors. In the Dream House that I read last year is one of my all-time favorite books, and this time it's not a memoir, this is a short story collection, and it's very much putting women's bodies under the microscope. It explores the many ways that they are unfortunately violated in society, and the book, it's queer, it's experimental, it's daring, and it's weird. I love how Carmen Machado has used so many different narrative tropes and genres to explore womanhood and misogyny and the patriarchy and women's bodies. She uses sci-fi, comedy, horror, magical realism, very much that speculative fiction, and I was so here for it. I do understand that quite a few of the stories, the plot itself can be a bit vague, the ending doesn't necessarily tie everything up, you know, in a cute little neat bow, but I liked the fact there were so many different interpretations you could make. I know when I reread it, and I will reread it, that I'm gonna gain a different perspective or learn something new. And I love when your brain gets stretched, but like in a good way, not where you're like, this is too abstract. Even just where there was so much room for that interpretation, it just made the reading experience all that bit more personal. It just gives you as the reader the space to really interact with the stories, with the narratives, and creates this very immersive experience. The queerness, it wasn't shoved down your throat, it was just a normal part of the story. She was normalizing queerness, and I'm so here for it. And yes, some of the stories will frustrate you, some of them are like fable, like fairy tale, like stories you've heard before but done in such a refreshing, new and exciting way. And I cannot wait to read more of Carmen Machado's work. She's not afraid to be different, she's not like the other girls, and I love it. So that was a 4.5 stars. Then the book I read before that was At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop, and it's translated from the French into English by Anna Moschovakis. I really hope I pronounced that correctly. David Diop is a Senegalese writer, and this book is historical fiction, which I have not picked up in a hot minute. This was the 2021 International Booker Prize winners, and the book itself is about these 2 Senegalese soldiers, and they're fighting for France in the First World War. The Senegalese soldier who we're reading from their perspective is Alpha, and his best friend, who he calls his more than brother, as in that they besties, they're BFFs, best friend forever. And he is killed during the war, and it's a really gruesome, horrible death, to the point that Mademba, the more than brother to Alpha, is begging Alpha, please just kill me. But Alpha can't bring himself to kill his best friend. So instead, Mademba dies a very excruciating and long death. This really, this plays with Alpha's mind. This really affects him. And it really is just an exploration of war, but also humanity, or maybe the lack of in the context of war, especially the savagery that is expected, particularly because these are Senegalese soldiers fighting for France. So because of racism and colonialist mindsets, they're assume that all Black Africans are savages, are extremely brutish and violent, and that is what is encouraged from them as soldiers in this war. I gave this book 4 stars, and honestly it was the ending that saved it for me, because it was more of a 3.5 stars as I was just going throughout the novel, because I really wish I felt more connected to the protagonist, that I could just empathize a bit more, and I really wish that I was invested in the friendship between Alpha and Mademba, as that is the heart, the core of the story. However, I really loved the non-linear nature of this novel, especially when we got to go back in time to Alpha's childhood in Senegal, when we understand about his family and especially his mother, and I felt that was beautiful. And then also the just kind of franticness, and I don't know if there was a touch of magical realism at the end, and just the absolute descent into chaos and essentially madness. The next book I'll be talking about is The Last Thing to Burn by Will Dean. And I gave this book, sound like I'm getting emotional. And I gave this book 3.5 stars. This novel is essentially about modern slavery, about human trafficking, and the very, very dark side of it. I mean, all parts of it is dark, but we are on this very isolated farm in the UK, and we're in the mind of this Vietnamese woman who has been trafficked to the UK, and she is held captive on this farm, very isolated farm, by this man. And she gets pregnant, and you see how she's like, there is no way I'm not protecting my child, like we are going to escape. And that is essentially what the book is about. What I love, the protagonists, they just have sense. They have sense. Like, by the time we start the book, this is not the first time she's trying to escape. No, my good sister's tried to escape multiple times in very, very clever and smart ways. It's just, unfortunately, it has not worked out so far. And although claustrophobic, I agree with that description of the book. Thriller, I think, is a bit of a stretch, because the only real thrilling elements were at the very, very end of the book. And even then, like, I feel like the thrilling elements could have been amped up a whole load more, considering the setup and the slow burn of the majority of this novel. However, Will Dean's writing, phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. The way he also just seamlessly weaved between the main dialogue of the book and then the inner monologue of the protagonist was just exquisite. Like, his writing was phenomenal. It was a very quick read. I think he did a really good job at shining light on the horrors of modern slavery and human trafficking, and it's very, very bleak, pretty disturbing, but that's the intention. That's what Will Dean wanted to do. I think he achieved that. So it was a good book. Just, I wish the thrilling elements were a lot more amplified, and we just got a bit more backstory into why the antagonist was the way he was. Cool. Next, we want to talk disturbing. Hurricane Season, written by Fernanda Melchor, and it's translated from the Spanish into English by Sophie Hughes. And Fernanda Melchor is a Mexican writer, and this book is set in Mexico, in this very small, poverty-stricken Mexican village. At the beginning of the book, you find out that the witch is dead. And it's not at all magical realism or fantasy or supernatural, no, by which they're actually referring to this transgender woman who lived in the village. And then the story essentially goes from there. You're finding out what actually happened to this woman who has been murdered and found near the irrigation canals, but also it's not really a whodunit novel or like thriller at all in that aspect. This is a very bleak, claustrophobic, pessimistic, unapologetic portrait of a very toxic side of Mexican culture. I just love that she did not sugarcoat anything in this novel. The entrenched machismo and misogyny and violence that is just in the pages of this novel was just done superbly. It is extremely disturbing at times, very bleak. I don't think there's really any hope or joy in this novel. So I can't truly say my reading experience was enjoyable, but I can admire what Melchor has created. I understand why people refer to this as a masterpiece, because I agree, I gave this 4.5 stars. It's just not 5 stars because I didn't really enjoy reading the book, so I was just like, 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 damn, there's a lot going on. And really showing about how your nature and the environment you grow in, how that does really impact people's lives, how people will grow up, the kind of people they will become. Because yes, the characters in here are horrible, they're awful, it's horrific, but also if you or I were born in such a place, who knows how you would have come out. Like, very much could have ended up becoming a character like this. And it's just, yeah, a phenomenal book. It will make you think, it will stick with you. Writing is so phenomenal because as soon as you open these pages, you are transported directly back to that Mexican village, like that. Sophie Hughes captures the franticness, this very just intenseness of Melchor's writing. There aren't really any like paragraph breaks. It just reads like this almost fever dream, and it's very frantic and intense, and it perfectly accompanies the story and the narrative that Melchor writes in this novel. But it's not a book I can just recommend to people. The content warnings, it's not even so much about how many content warnings there are, it's the way Melchor explores them. This is like, if this was a show or movie, this is 18 plus, this is R-rated, like this is very intense. You want to make sure you are in quite a good mental headspace. If you really are someone who does not enjoy like reading about quite horrible violence or just disturbing things that human beings are capable of, this might not be for you. Then the next book I finally finished was This Is Going to Hurt: Secret Diaries of a Junior Doctor by Adam Kay. And I started reading this maybe in 2020, or was it 2021? Who knows? But it was my commuting book. So whenever I was on the tube or traveling, like this was the one I'd whip out. Gave it a solid 4.5 stars. This is non-fiction, and it's a memoir of Adam Kay's life when he was a junior doctor. And it's all these different diary entries that he made when he was a junior doctor for, was it over, I think, 10 years? The book is witty, it's repulsive, it's frustrating, it's informative, and I honestly think it should be mandatory reading for everyone in the UK so that no one takes for granted the NHS. And I feel like for this book to be that kind of 4.55 stars, if you're British, that will be the case, because there are a lot of those British pop culture references and there's a lot of that British dry humour, which I absolutely adored. However, if you're not British, I feel like you would still find this book extremely interesting, informative, especially if you're from a country where you don't have universal healthcare, and the humour is still just funny, it's still great. I do think you might not get all the references and jokes if you're not British, but I think it's still a wonderful book to read. It's one that would definitely stick with me. I really do enjoy it when an author is able to make a book both very informative, but also it almost can read a little bit like fiction, and learning about different medical terminologies and different illnesses or medical terms, but also even getting insights into like his personal relationships with family, with his partner, with other colleagues. And it was just a wonderful, very personal way to capture what it is like to work as a doctor in the NHS. The next book I read was a very different kind of book, and it is Lemon, which is written by Kwon, and it's translated from the Korean into English by Janet Hong. This book is initially set in Korea in the summer of 2002, and this really beautiful high school girl is murdered in a park. And then we follow how this murder affects her sister and her mother. We're also finding out who did murder her, as no one is actually charged for the murder. There are two main suspects. There's this very rich high schooler whose dad is quite prominent in Korea, and then you have this quite poor delivery boy who appears to perhaps have some learning difficulties, but then you really see how this affects her sister, and her sister goes to some extreme lengths to deal with her grief. And also we then now go into the future. I'm not sure if it's like 10 years later or so, where the sister is again trying to actually piece together what has happened. I want to know, I need that closure to know what happened to my sister. And what was very interesting is that at the beginning of each chapter, you don't know who's narrating it. And so you have to figure out from what they're saying, from the dialogue, from the way they're speaking, like who's actually talking, like what are they referring to? And I actually enjoyed that. Like, yeah, it made me work a little bit. Like I found that just quite interesting. I've never seen a book really do something like that before. Altogether, this was a pretty odd novella. It used very experimental techniques to explore grief, to explore religion, inequality, classism, mental health, guilt and revenge. Also particularly misogyny and how misogyny is embedded in South Korea and South Korean culture. The dialogue, it was very off-kiltering, very uneasy at times to read, quite frantic. The narration styles were often quite detached, and I feel like it worked well for the purpose of this kind of novella. It's not your typical whodunit novella. It's not really a thriller per se. It is more about the exploration into those different themes that I mentioned before, like guilt, revenge, misogyny, class, religion, all these things. And I just enjoyed that it was such a different take on like that kind of social commentary and that exploration of those themes. It was just very, very different, and that's why I appreciated this book. However, I understand why it won't be for everyone. It is so off-kiltering and so kind of manic the way it jumps from chapter to chapter, from narrator to narrator. You're not even sure who's talking, so it can be quite confusing at times. I personally don't mind that, but it won't be for everyone. And also overall, I feel like it is kind of an unforgettable novella that if you asked me in a year's time, I probably would struggle to tell you the premise or the plot of this novella, but it's one I'm really glad I read. Now we're jumping to a sci-fi thriller, and the book that I read was Recursion by Blake Crouch. And this is my second Blake Crouch novel. I read Dark Matter last year, which I loved, gave that a solid 4 stars, and I gave this one also a 4 stars. It was so close to being a 4.5 stars. It was for the majority of this novel. However, the ending, last 20 pages or so, it just got too sciencey for my little brain. It was becoming quite repetitive, and the ending was a little bit cringe for my liking. We're following this cop in New York City, Barry Sutton, who starts investigating this phenomenon that is happening in the city, where some people are claiming to have memories of this completely different life that they've supposedly lived, and these memories are just infiltrating their brain. They feel extremely real, and for a lot of people it ends up pushing them to take their own life, unfortunately. And he witnesses this when he's on duty one day and starts investigating it further, and we get to investigate that with him. We switch between his perspective and then the perspective of this scientist, and through her perspective we find out how this phenomenon came to be, and also how this phenomenon ends up affecting Barry's life personally. And then we go from there. I don't want to give too much more than that because it is a thriller as well as sci-fi, and just the twists and turns this book would take. Don't even bother trying to guess what will happen next, because Blake Crouch would be like, you thought. I just take you a whole different direction, but it makes sense. And I love the wild fun ride that he takes you on with this novel. It really makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about memories, about reality, about time, and the sci-fi elements, apart from, as I said right at the end, that he explains them in a way that is actually understandable. It feels realistic, it makes sense, and like it feels as if this could happen in our world. So I like that it is very grounded in reality, the sci-fi elements. I'm not going to pretend like I cared for any of the characters, not one tiny bit. But that was the same case for Dark Matter, and for me, especially with thrillers, I don't need to care for the characters. I'm more interested in the plot, and the plot, that's what Blake Crouch gives you. Plot. It's cinematic, it's action-packed, it's fast-paced. You also get relationships developing, undeveloping, and going through a whole roller coaster of emotions. And it's just, I can imagine how well they'll translate into TV shows or films. And Blake Crouch is just such a immersive writer. Like the worlds he creates, like you feel like you are there. They feel so real. One of my favorite directors is Christopher Nolan. As I absolutely love Inception. One of my favorite films, Memento, amazing. You know, you've got Tenet, Interstellar. Blake Crouch to me is Christopher Nolan in the literary space, in the book space, because the whole exploration of like time and memories, reality, and as I said, it's so cinematic, his writing, his stories. So I like, he's the Christopher Nolan of the literary space, and you can fight me in the comments if you want. The next two books that I read were Heartstopper Volume 1 and Heartstopper Volume 2. And these are comics written by Alice Oseman. And I gave the first one a 4 stars and the second one a 5 stars. My only 5 stars of this quarter. And I've done a whole video where I talk about all my like in-depth detailed thoughts about both these novels. So I'll link that down below, put a little chapter here. The book follows Charlie, who is this year 10 boy that was outed in his school for being gay the year before. He ends up sitting next to a new classmate, Nick, who is this like rugby year 11 boy. They strike up a friendship. Charlie starts gaining feelings for Nick, and eventually Nick starts realizing that, maybe he's not straight after all because of this connection that he has with Charlie. And then we go from there. Just a healthy and wholesome queer coming of age story. It was a very like accurate representation of what it's like to be a teenager. It was very realistic the way that their relationship developed, and the side characters, the secondary characters, also amazing. Just having such healthy LGBTQIA plus representation was just phenomenal, and it will bring you so much joy. They also do tackle quite deep and darker issues, as in just what it's like to be a teenager. It is a coming of age story as well, so I like that you have the fluffiness, the lightheartedness, the just cuteness of the comics, but also you delve into some more deeper, more personal things too, which a lot of people will be able to relate with, especially teenagers. And I'm just so glad there is this very healthy, this kind of representation for LGBTQIA plus teenagers to have now. Next we have a short story, Recitatif by Toni Morrison. And this is a very intriguing short story about two girls. We know that one is black and one is white, but you are not told which one is which at all. And of course you're thinking, it'll probably be quite obvious, quite easy to figure it out, but you'll be going back and forth as you read this short story. In terms of the actual plot, there's not really much to say because it's generally like, what, 20 to 30 pages, just read it. But what I did find intriguing was that I couldn't help my mind ticking about which girl was which race, and I found that it was stressing me out because I almost didn't know which character to empathize with more when I didn't know their race. I found myself being conflicted that I was unable to assign a race to either of them, because things happen where you're like trying to decide which character essentially is on the right side of things. It really just brings to light the biases and prejudices we have when it comes to race and different races, what kind of attributes or characteristics or behavioral traits we assign to different races, where we're thinking, if they speak like that or they did this, they must be blah blah blah, or oh no, but if they've had this kind of upbringing or blah blah blah, they must be this race. So it just really does make your mind tick, and I just thought it was a really just clever way to shine light on racial biases and prejudices. And Toni Morrison, I mean, it's her writing, the woman can do no wrong. So that was a solid 4 stars. Next I read Crying in Mart by Michelle Zauner, and this is non-fiction. It's a memoir about Michelle Zauner, who is a music artist in a band called the Japanese Breakfast Club. I still am yet to listen to their music, but I need to. And this book is about when she was 25, I want to say, and her mother is diagnosed with cancer, and she's had a very tumultuous relationship with her mother and with her father. And she then goes back home to help look after her mother, to help her as she's trying to fight and beat this cancer. And that's essentially what this memoir is about. I have very mixed feelings about this memoir. It was a 3.5 stars for me. I really appreciate the rawness and honesty that Michelle brought to this book. She did not shy away from the often ugliness in her family dynamics, and I really appreciated that she did not shy away from her own flaws either, even though, you know, she also exposed her mother's flaws, her father's flaws, but she also is very honest about her own ones too. However, in terms of the actual content of this memoir, my interest wasn't really piqued until she actually went back home to help look after her mother, and we got to see that relationship dynamic in real time in this memoir. But oh, the food descriptions and the way food, it just proved that food is a love language, this book, especially between her and her mother. The food descriptions were tantalizing, just mouth watering. But the writing overall, it was pretty simple. And I think after reading memoirs like Know My Name and In the Dream House, and of course not comparing because memoirs are memoirs, they're extremely personal, but where the writing itself was also so just either beautiful or experimental, or it just added a further layer to the memoir and to the actual content of the book. That was lacking for me with this one. However, in terms of the actual content, especially if you're someone who's gone through something similar like grief of a parent, this will hit home. Like, I was still crying, even though fortunately I have not gone through that. And you can just tell Michelle wrote this for herself. It was a cathartic experience, and the fact that so many people will be able to resonate with it is amazing in and of itself. Just for me personally, it's not one of my favorite memoirs. It didn't impact me in the same way others have. Next, we have a cult classic, The Secret History by Donna Tart. Finally got around to this big boy. And this book is essentially about a group of eccentric misfits who are at this elite New England college, and they are also part of this very elite kind of Greek, not society, but class in the college, where the professor only allows 5 or 6 people at a time each year to be a part of his class. And they really focus on ancient Greek history. They have to learn the classical Greek language, Latin too, and things take a turn. A very dark turn. Their way of just thinking and living an idea of reality is very different to, you know, all the other college students around them. However, they end up taking things beyond the realms of normal morality, and then all their lives are profoundly changed after that. And I feel like you don't need to know any more of that for the plot, because a big part of it is the sort of mystery element and figuring out like what's happened, what have they done or not done. I don't have that much experience with dark academia, and this is considered the like godfather of dark academia. I did give it a solid 4 stars. I just have a lot of conflicting thoughts on this book, because I really understand why so many people love it, and I also understand why a lot of people would hate it, because at the end of the day, Donna Tart's writing is superb. You are completely transported to this college every time you open the book. The writing was phenomenal. I really loved how all the different Greek elements and Shakespearean elements were just seamlessly weaved throughout the text. And the characters, yes, they were extremely unlikable, just awful characters, but they felt very real. They were so fleshed out, very 3D, very just quirky and unique, and you wanted to know more about them. Like, why are they the way that they are? Like, how do all these different dynamics work? And honestly, sometimes just reading about some like rich white college kids, it's just fascinating. Like, wow, this is the life you live. However, I feel like this book could have easily been like 200 pages shorter. There were some things which were definitely dragged out, and as much as Donna Tart's writing was amazing, it was like, yeah, we can condense that, honey. We can condense that a lot. And also it's very whitewashed, and you hear this a lot about dark academia in general, which is why I don't usually gravitate towards it. Diversity was bleh. But also I'm like, you know what, it is a very elite New England college. How many Black, South Asian, East Asian, Latin, Native American people even want to go there in the first place? So to be fair, maybe it being whitewashed was realistic to an extent, just not as enjoyable to read about for someone like me. But Donna Tart's writing herself, I am intrigued by, and I definitely could pick up more of her work. Next, we have The Troop by Nick Cutter, and this was also a 4 stars. This is a horror slash thriller book, but in terms of horror, it's more body horror. Like, if you don't like gross, squeamish, like books, this is not for you. It's not going to be a bit of you. Following a group of boys that are part of this like Boy Scout club, like their troop. They have this 3-day camping trip every year. They go their Scoutmaster. Of course, it's in a very remote island where there's no communication with the mainland. Like, oh, I wonder if anything bad will happen. And they end up facing this horror. But not only are they trying to defeat this horror that they end up facing on this island, they then end up essentially having to face off with each other. So it's very a claustrophobic book because you are just stuck on this island with them as they're all just trying to survive. It's so gross. It is disgusting. It will make you cringe. It is, but in the best way possible. Like, I was reading it like, oh, but I was like, let's keep getting through. Like, I was here for it. It definitely served its purpose as a body horror novel. Yes, is reading about 14-year-old boys annoying? Of course. Like, their dialogue, their way of thinking, yeah, it's a bit jarring, it's a bit annoying. And could this book be a bit shorter? Yes. Could the writing have been a bit simpler? Yes. But at the end of the day, it served its purpose well as a good body horror novel. I cringed and squirmed in all the ways that I wanted to. I think the plot and certain character developments were very good and intriguing as well. And then the first book that I read this quarter was Convenience Store Women by Sayaka Murata and is translated from the Japanese into English by Ginny Takemori. Again, I've got mixed feelings about this book. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. And initially when I was reading it, it was a solid 5 stars because I actually fell in love with the protagonist, Keiko, who is the convenience store woman. And the book essentially is following Keiko. And I love that Murata does not explicitly specify that she is neurodivergent, but from her thinking, from her actions, and from the way people treat her, you can figure out that she is neurodivergent, and just her way of viewing life and just wanting to fit in, it will just capture your heart. I really love how Murata just uses this character to illuminate how homogenous society really is, especially how homogenous Japanese society is. And if you even slightly deter from what society deems as normal, as acceptable, as what is just expected from people in life, it really unsettles people, even though it's not their life. Like, you're not the one having to live this life. I love how she's just using this book to try and dismantle all these societal norms and expectations that are placed on people, that by a certain age you should be married, and that you should be even getting married and having a nuclear family, and that only certain kind of jobs are acceptable up to a certain age, and everyone should have these massive career ambitions and drives and goals. And just, I love how this was explored in the novel. And that's why at first I thought this was going to be 4.5 star, 5 star. And then a certain character was introduced, and the dynamic between Keiko and this character, the social commentary became just so on the nose. It just wasn't as enjoyable to read. And I know part of that was intentional, that this character brought in was meant to be this really horrible, just character. And yeah, that was the case, but it just wasn't no longer enjoyable to read. The social commentary was far too on the nose. I liked that it was quite subtle before and just underlying, and you could just infer things from dialogue, from just different perspectives, whilst yeah, it just became a bit like shoved down my throat, and I did not enjoy that nearly as much. But the ending did save it for me. The ending was just very wholesome and maybe a bit unrealistic, but I loved it. Not my fave book, but I'm very excited to read more of Murata's writing, because her writing and the kind of characters she's able to create was phenomenal. So Earthlings, that is a high priority on my TBR. So those are the 14 books that I read in April, May and June. As I said, not as much of a strong quarter as Jan, Feb, March, but still found some gems this quarter. And I hope you enjoyed my review of these books. If you've read any of them, enjoyed them, let me know in the comment. If any of these have piqued your interest, also let me know in the comments. Let's talk. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of my bookish related content, then subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.